Hey, imagine this for a second.
Yeah.
You live in Jalan Kayu, or maybe Sembawang West.
Okay.
Now, picture this. The place you actually go to vote,
Yeah.
it might not even be there next election.
Wow. Yeah. That's quite a thought.
Sounds a bit wild, right? But this isn't just, a random theory. And look, even if you don't live near those spots, trust me, there's a really good reason why you should probably pay attention to this.
Absolutely. What we're diving into today is this whole potential redrawing of Singapore's electoral boundaries. And it's way more than just like lines moving on a map.
Right. It actually matters.
It really matters. It hits how we're represented, the whole structure of, well, our political setup. And recent election results, plus some pretty lively chats online, they're leading people to predict some familiar names might just disappear from the electoral map.
And that's our mission today, isn't it? To sort of unpack why these predictions are popping up, especially for Jalan Kayu and Sembawang West.
Yeah, what does it tell us?
What does it tell us about how things work here, electorally speaking? And yeah, like you said, this is sparked by discussions we've seen, including this really interesting Reddit thread.
That's right. The online buzz really kicked off, particularly in a thread on RASC Singapore right after GE 2025.
Okay.
People started looking closely at the numbers, speculating, which constituencies might be up for changes when the Electoral Boundaries Review Committee gets going, the EBRC.
The EBRC.
Right. What? And Jalan Kayu and Sembawang West, their names just keep coming up.
Okay, let's break that down then. Start with Jalan Kayu. It's an SMC, single-member constituency. Why is it seen as, well, vulnerable, according to these online folks?
Well, I think what's really telling there is how incredibly close the race was in GE 2025.
The results themselves.
Exactly. So Peipi's Ng Chimeng, he won the seat, sure. But his win over the Workers' Party candidate, Andre Lo, it was super narrow. Just 51.47% of the vote.
51.47.
Yeah. And, historically in Singapore, these really, really tight contests, they often kind of act as a sign that maybe the boundaries for that area might be revisited.
So that close call, it's like a flag maybe for the EBRC, like, maybe look at this one. Why, though? What's the thinking there?
Well, if you think about it, a really tight win could suggest, growing competition maybe, or perhaps a shift in how voters in that specific spot are feeling.
Okay.
So the EBRC might then think about redrawing the lines, perhaps to, create what they see as more, let's say, stable outcomes in the future.
Right, stability. And we see something similar playing out with Sembawang West, don't we? Another SMC, another fairly close race.
Indeed. Very similar story, relatively speaking. In Sembawang West, Pep's Polisan won against Dr. Chee Sin Huan from the SDP.
Right.
But again, the margin, only around 53% of the vote.
Still quite tight, even if slightly more than Jalan Kayu.
Exactly. It's a bit wider, sure. But it's still in that kind of zone, that range of constituencies that could be seen as more politically contested. And often these are the ones that either get changed quite a bit or sometimes just absorbed completely when the EBRC does its review.
Okay, now this committee you mentioned, the Electoral Boundaries Review Committee, EBRC, sounds like they're pretty important in all this. Tell us a bit more about them. How do they operate?
Oh, they're definitely influential. Hugely so. The key thing to grasp, really, is that they work with a lot of independence and discretion.
Okay.
Their whole review process, it happens behind closed doors, and there's actually no legal requirement for them to come out and explain why they made the decisions they made.
Really? So no public justification needed?
Nope. But even without that public explanation, their recommendations on the size, the shape of both the big GRCs, the group representation constituencies, and the smaller SMCs, they have a massive, very real impact on our whole electoral system.
Wow. So they can basically redraw the map, and we don't necessarily get the full why. That seems like it would naturally fuel a lot of guesswork, right?
Exactly. Which brings us right back to Reddit and what people are predicting for these possibly at-risk SMCs.
Okay, let's start with Jalan Kayu again. What are the main scenarios being thrown around online?
Well, based on those discussions, one common prediction is that Jalan Kayu could just be sort of folded back into Ang Mo Kio GRC. It used to be part of it, actually.
So returning to a previous state?
Potentially. Another idea being floated is a bit more complex, maybe merging bits of Jalan Kayu with parts of Hougang, Buangkok, maybe Serangoon North to make a totally new, maybe a 4-member GRC.
That's a significant change. But wasn't there a counterpoint about Jalan Kayu's population? Something about its size maybe preventing it from just disappearing?
Yeah, that's an interesting angle people brought up, the population numbers. Some Redditors argue, look, Jalan Kayu might actually have enough people living there that just erasing it completely wouldn't quite work.
What?
Well, the argument is It could make the neighboring constituencies, like Ang Mo Kio or Sengkang, suddenly way too big in terms of voter numbers, like unbalanced.
Okay, so maybe not total removal then.
Yeah.
Which leads to this other idea you mentioned. Not gone, but maybe adjusted.
Exactly. That's the alternative thought, gaining some steam. Instead of wiping Jalan Kayu off the map entirely, maybe the EBRC shifts certain blocks, specific precincts, over to Ang Mo Kio GRC, or maybe into Sengkang.
And the purpose of that would be?
That could possibly pave the way for creating a new 5-member GRC. So you're reshaping the area's electoral map, but Jalan Kayu still exists, kind of, as a known area within a larger constituency.
Right, it changes form rather than vanishing. Okay, interesting. Now let's pivot to Sembawang West. What are the predicted outcomes for that SMC?
For Sembawang West, the online consensus seems a little more straightforward, maybe. The most likely prediction is that it just goes back to being part of the bigger Sembawang GRC.
Like Jalan Kayu potentially returning to AMK GRC.
Exactly, just undoing a previous boundary change. There's also another possibility mentioned, less common maybe, but still there, that it could rejoin Woodlands GRC. That was its setup even before it was part of Sembawang GRC.
So for Sembawang West, it mostly seems to be about reabsorption into existing larger GRCs.
That seems to be the main line of thought, yeah.
Now, this Reddit thread wasn't just about these two SMCs, was it?
Yeah.
People were talking about potentially broader changes, too.
Oh, yeah, definitely. If you zoom out a bit, the speculation goes wider. For instance, there's talk that Tampines Changkat SMC might disappear.
Another SMC potentially gone.
Right. Absorbed into the main Tampines GRC. And some people even suggested parts of Tampines Changkat could be sort of moved over to Pasir Ris Changi GRC, maybe to, strengthen that GRC electorally.
Interesting. And it's not all about constituencies disappearing, is it? There was also talk about totally new ones being created.
Yes, that's the flip side. Amidst all the potential merging and dissolving, there's speculation about brand new constituencies emerging.
Whereabouts? Which areas are being talked about for new SMCs?
Well, the focus seems to be on places that have seen a lot of growth, population booms, demographic shifts.
Makes sense.
So Redditors are predicting possible new SMCs in areas like Jurong North and Jurong South, maybe, Tampines North and Tampines South, Loyang, Chai Chi, even Tekgi gets mentioned.
And the logic there is simply population growth.
Pretty much. The thinking is, as these areas grow and change, the EBRC might see a need for new, smaller constituencies, new SMCs, to make sure there's more sort of localized representation.
Listening to all this, it's striking how much it seems rooted in past experience. It's not like this is the first time boundaries have been redrawn or constituencies have vanished.
Oh, absolutely not. That's a crucial point. These predictions aren't just pulled out of thin air. There's a very clear history in Singapore of electoral boundaries being redrawn. Especially, and this is often noted, in areas where the political contest seems to be heating up or, like we discussed, where constituencies had really close results in the previous election. So yeah, this historical context definitely gives some weight to the current speculation.
Okay, so we've covered the online buzz, looked at why Jalan Kayu and Sembawang Wests are under the microscope, and even explored these wider potential shifts, plus the historical angle. Now, let's bring it back to you, listening right now.
Yeah, this really leads to some big questions for you to think about. Given everything we've talked about, the close results, the history, what's your gut feeling? Do you actually think Jalan Kayu and Sembawang West will survive the next EBRC review as they are now?
And maybe think bigger than just those two places. This EBRC, this committee with so much power over how we vote and who represents us, should its decisions be more open? Should they have to explain themselves more to the public?
It really makes you ponder, doesn't it? This whole deep dive into potential boundary changes. Maybe it's time for Singapore to, reconsider the whole process, how these constituency lines get drawn in the first place.
Yeah. Considering the impact it has, not just on specific areas, but on representation and the whole political landscape, way beyond just the two SMCs we focused on today.
You're right.
Something to think about.